this title is also sort of the title we use at the UN to describe our work on asset management. The first challenge that I encountered was to make it sound relatable. Actually, we started out calling it municipal asset management, simply because I, at the end, come from an angle of municipal finance and development finance, and we realized that a lot of focus is going into helping local governments around the world with their finances, and there's not nearly enough done on that. But a critical area that is overlooked is how governments do manage or do not manage their assets. And with those, we are not referring to furniture and equipment or computers, but infrastructure assets like facilities like roads, waste management facilities, water and sanitation systems, but also smaller assets, parks, street lighting, things like that. And we realized that this is an area that could use some perhaps fresh thinking and support. And quickly, the idea became clearer that it's really about infrastructure assets and not necessarily only municipal assets. Infrastructure assets can be managed at the local level, at the national level, and often they're managed by different layers of government with involvement of the private sector, sometimes even entirely by the private sector. And we also realize that there's often a misunderstanding between financial assets and non-financial assets. So for the sake of people not thinking that I'm a pure finance guy looking at assets and liabilities, we made it clear by saying, okay, we're talking about infrastructure assets. Why sustainable development? Well, there are some studies the UN has done on how many goals, sustainable development goals, which I hope you're familiar with, but these are sort of the goalposts of the United Nations in terms of what it wants to achieve around the world. 92% of those goals and their targets are really directly dependent or indirectly dependent, but in a very strong way on infrastructure. So that's how the title came about, Infrastructure Asset Management for Sustainable Development. As Mike mentioned, we did a handbook, and the challenge at first was really to get the time and the resources to do that handbook. We did some technical assistance around infrastructure asset management, helping local governments in a few countries around the world, small, challenging countries like Uganda, Bangladesh, Nepal, Tanzania. But we really didn't have the time or the resources to capture everything in a knowledge product. Then came COVID, and with COVID, a lot of bad things happened, but some new opportunities popped up because of people not being able to travel and resources being able to be reallocated. So we seized that opportunity and said, okay, let's all come together, use these 2 years to really write down what we've learned. And this is the table of content of the handbook. It has two parts. One is really a introduction to asset management for government officials at the city level and at the national level. And the second part is really about deep dives on certain issues related to asset management, like climate vulnerability or building asset management data systems and so forth. I'm not going to go.
Daniel,
Daniel,
1 second. I've got two things. One is just yesterday, I was talking with our colleagues at the Australian Asset Management Council, and they're very interested in connecting our value and benefits from asset management slide template to include how does your activity meet any of the UN sustainability goals. So we'll talk more about that later directly. Yeah, we've got some meetings to have, David. Per Daniel.
Here, just, this is sort of the typical slide we show when we try to make the case to governments as to why infrastructure asset management is important. I just mentioned this sort of study that over 90% of the sustainable development goals at the UN, and I'll be happy to talk about those in a second, are related to infrastructure. And there's other statistics. Data is really kind of hard to come by, in a sense that to fully understand, the value of asset management. Everyone sees it, but in translating it into, for example, economic growth or financial costs, it's tricky. But there are some studies out there from the World Bank, from the Institute of Asset Management, saying that if you don't do proper maintenance, for example, which is of course key part of asset management, you can lose up to 2% in GDP growth, which is very painful, especially for developing countries, or up to 85% of the costs associated to an asset and its lifespan actually are happening or are incurred after the construction acquisition phase. So try to hammer down those points just to sort of make sure that people understand the importance of it. Excuse me. And here's just a picture of the handbook. This is, I think, a picture taken by Linda in Bogota, Colombia. She's a great, not only a great instructor, but also a great photographer. So we use that as a cover. And to the left, you have some of the key, chapters, and some of the sort of visuals that we use in there. I'm going to go very quickly through some of these process charts, but this one is probably one that deserves a little bit of attention. It's the first step that we try to promote with local governments that we work with in our workshops. So, when we go into a new country, it starts out with us assessing the challenges, really traveling to different cities, asking a bunch of questions, spending a few days with them just to see, how they manage their assets, if they understand what asset management is, where they see their challenges. And then based on that, we go back and design a workshop. And at that workshop, we are asking local governments to first identify one priority asset that they really want to focus on, and we teach them how to prioritize according to sort of the very well-known prioritization methods. Nothing like no rocket science but it's a very helpful effort for them to talk to each other and to realize which assets are more important than others at that current point in time. And then we essentially ask them to do this sort of gap analysis, which is described here. What are you doing in terms of managing that particular asset, whether it's a road or a water sanitation system right now? What do you think could be done better? And the idea here is not to create a new detailed maintenance plan. They might have that already in place, but to really do a gap analysis at the city level so that everyone from different angles can chip in and share ideas as to how asset management for that particular asset can be improved over the long term and what is required to do so. Here are just some few other pictures. This is from our perhaps one of our most popular chapters on climate change, and this is exciting because we managed to get an expert on board with Dustin Carey, who is really leading efforts in Canada to help municipalities there build climate resilient asset management policies and strategies. And as he was developing that, he was developing this chapter. So it's very much in line with what Canada is really trying to do also at the national level. And it walks countries through a vulnerability assessment, giving them very concrete ideas how to evaluate priorities for climate change and its impact on assets, and when to take action and when not to take action, when to defer action, things like that. So it's a very helpful tool, and it also has a lot of free information sources in there as well.